Thank you for joining me again today for day 2 of the Adalynn Dress pattern. I'm your host, Elizabeth Singler, and here I have already had my dress cut yesterday, and so today I want to start attaching the pockets and the neckband. So the first thing that we're going to do is just lay out our back piece and our front piece. And as you remember yesterday, we did mark all of our pocket points. So what we're going to do first is we're going to attach the pockets to the back. Now, as you can see, there is a right and a wrong way to attach these pockets. So this way, the pocket teardrop almost is kind of pointing down, and I'm actually putting it with the right sides together just like this. And so how I'm going to do it is this is one of the notches and this is one of the notches, and this pocket fits perfectly between those two notches like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a couple clips and I'm going to clip it into place. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, making sure that my teardrop is facing down like that. Okay, so now that I have all of my pockets attached, what I'm going to do now is sew them into place. I am going to use my serger for a good chunk of this tutorial, but what I want to do first is actually use my sewing machine to sew them on. The seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to start right here at the very edge of the pocket and sew all the way to the other side of the pocket using a stretchable stitch. I will go do that right now and I'll be right back. Alright, so I did get my pockets attached, and you can see here I just started here, went to the other side to attach them all. So now what we're going to do is just not worry about the pockets anymore for now, and we're going to take the back piece and we're just going to lay it right on top of the front piece. And I'm going to use my clips and I'm going to attach it. I'm going to attach it a little bit down the arms and into the neckline a little bit, as well as just one clip on the end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sew the shoulders together with my serger. You could also use a sewing machine with a stretchable stitch. The stretch stitch is really important with anything when you're working with knits. So there we have it. So I'm just literally going to start on this side, sew this shoulder together from this one, and sew this shoulder together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'll be right back. So I have sewed the shoulders together just like that. Now what I'm going to do is set my body pieces aside, and I am going to grab my binding piece. Now, as you can remember, we did cut notches in it, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But first what we need to do is actually attach the ends of the binding together. So I'm just going to fold it in half like that. I might use a clip or two right here, and then I'm just going to go serge this edge right here with 3/8 inch of a seam allowance. I'll be right back. So I have sewed the ends of my binding together, and now what I have is a round that I can stick my hand in. This is going to be the binding for your baby's neckline, or the neckline of your garment. So I'm going to set that aside for right now, and then I'm going to place my dress pieces right side up, and I'm just going to take note of which side is the front and which is the back. So the front has a deeper scoop in the neckline, and that is the front, and so this is the back. And as you remember, we had cut notches for all of the quarter points, so I've got one here, one here, one here, and one here at the back. Then I'm going to take my binding, and remember we also have notches in the binding, and so I'm just going to locate those. And remember, this seam is actually going to be at the back of the dress. And so basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to put it on top of the neckline like this, and then bring the neck of the dress up into it. So I'm going to make sure that all of my notches are on the top side of this tube here. So here I'm going to attach the front to the front notch. So here's my front notch, and I'm going to attach it here like this with clips. This is the easiest way to do binding with having everything pre-notched. Then I'm going to bring up the back side of my dress, and I'm going to attach that to the seam of my binding. Then I'm going to find the notch here on the side and the notch on the side of the neckline, and I'm going to attach that. And then the other side too. Okay, so then if I were to pick it up, you could see that I have my round all put together, and my right sides are together. The right side of the binding is touching the right side of the dress. That's really important. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to sew the edge of the neckline to the edge of the binding. And when I do that, I'm going to have to stretch the binding a little bit because the neckline is actually just a smidge bigger than the binding. And we do that on purpose so that the binding will draw the neckline in so it won't be gaping open on your baby. All right, I'll go do that and show you what it looks like. Okay, so as you can see, I did sew around the neckline, and this is the wrong side, so with the right sides together. And I did forget to mention that I always start at the back here. That way if there's any kind of overlap or if I mess up myself, I don't have something going on in the front and the shirt is still wearable. So I started here and then pulled this to fit the neckline as I sewed that together, and I did do that with my serger. So this side is still raw, so I'm going to show you what to do with it now. Okay, so here is the neckline. So what we're going to do is we are going to push this inward, but I want to grab hold of this seam here and pull it toward the upside, basically, so the side up against the body, so it's right here inside this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use my clips and I'm going to clip it into place, and when I fold this over, I just want to have it be sticking up just enough to cover my seam allowance. So if you use a serger, it would be 1/4 of an inch. If you didn't use a serger, it would be 3/8 of an inch. There's plenty of the binding in the back to accommodate for that. So I'll show you how to clip it. This is easiest to do with clips, but it is also okay to do with pins. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking my hands and I'm pushing my seam allowance into this gap where I am making my binding. And I might clip that there. So now that I have it clipped thoroughly, what I'm going to do is I could do a couple different things actually. I could take and just do a stitch on this side really close to where I have this fold over, and it will hold it from the back side. It'll hold that into place. Or I could take a zigzag stitch and go from here and make it a wide zigzag stitch so it hits both the binding and this side here. Or I could do a double needle where one side of the needle is on this side and the other side of the needle is on the binding. What I am going to do this time is I'm actually only going to use one stitch with one needle, and I'm going to use a stretch stitch, and I'm going to sew directly on the binding very close to this edge here where they meet. And what that's going to do is it's going to attach the binding to the seam underneath, and it's going to hold the whole thing together. I'll be right back to show you what it looks like. So I finished sewing the binding into place, and this is what it looks like. So on the inside, underneath this extra bit of binding flap, you can still see this. Now, if you wanted to hide that, all I would have to do is push that down and sew another seam right here underneath. Or like I said, if you had a cover stitch machine or a double needle, you could sew with this seam here and a seam here and go all the way around in one step. But since I'm not going to do that today, what I am going to do is trim off this excess. So as you can see here, I have that trimmed off. When I turn it right side out, it is gorgeous. Okay, thank you for joining me today.